It's Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. Mike Tomlin indicated that Troy Fautanu is going to continue to start, but left the door open for still a future with Broderick Jones to get back into the starting lineup. We'll talk about what about that strategy makes sense, doesn't make sense, how it could play out for the Steelers. Also, how the Steelers will continue using the quarterback situation with Justin Fields continuing to start and Russell Wilson still not sure when he's going to come back. And we'll talk about Mike Tomlin says he's okay with the receivers behind George Pickens. Is that the truth? We'll get into all that here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with one of our great Steelers beat writers, Ray Fittipaldo. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, we were both at the Mike Tomlin press conference on Tuesday, and outside of talking about how hot dogs are getting made, I thought that one of the biggest things he acknowledged was the offensive tackle situation, because those are the two last first-round picks for the Steelers in Broderick Jones last year and Troy Fautanu this year. He had high praise for Troy Fautanu and how he played in this game, and he said that's more so the reason why he's now starting at right tackle than Broderick Jones's mistakes. But he also acknowledged Broderick Jones's penalties were a problem, and that's something that he's moving forward. And right now, Broderick Jones, he said, has a chance to get back into the lineup. What do you make about how this is a situation that's playing, because both of these guys were drafted to be pillars for this offensive line for years to come. Yeah. And Dan Moore Jr. is still starting at left tackle.
I mean, the only chance Broderick Jones has to get into the lineup this week is if Dan Moore or Troy Fautanu gets injured. I mean, that's it, Chris. I mean, we saw in that Broncos game that he's not ready to play. And there was evidence of that throughout the preseason. Go back to that Bills game when he gave up 2 sacks in probably 10 snaps against Greg Rousseau. So there have been ongoing issues with his on-field performance. I know we've talked about some of these the injuries that he's had really since the beginning of training camp. So, I'm not trying to make excuses for the guy. I think in the end, Chris, I think that's what people, fans and media have done here for the last 6 or 7 weeks. They want to talk about Broderick's injuries. They want to talk about going from right to left and left to right and how the Steelers are doing him a disservice. But the Steelers aren't using that as an excuse. So maybe the fans and the media should stop doing that as well. And the bottom line is, right now, he's not better than Dan Moore. Mm-hmm. He's not better than Troy Fautanu. So he doesn't belong in the lineup. That's kind of the way I look at it right now.
See, that's the thing, is that I agree. Like right now, if you look at honestly at how they're playing, and Troy Fautanu's really only played 1 game, but he looks better than Broderick Jones did in any of the games that he's played. Dan Moore Jr. has actually been one of the better offensive linemen for the Steelers. As crazy as that sounds, you look back and you see, like, hey, Spencer Anderson's had to start for Isaac Seumalo, but Dan Moore and James Daniels are the veterans on this offensive line who are carrying it right now. And that's not to say that Zach Frazier is doing a pretty good job, because he is, and he actually might be the best offensive lineman the Steelers have right now. But veteran-wise, Dan Moore Jr., and you said this back in training camp, he's not letting go of this starting role this year. He's been working really hard to keep it. He's been playing well, and I think that's part of the equation, is that the Steelers still want to just play the best guys. Yeah. Troy Fautanu comes in. He's not raw. He's got a lot more experience at tackle in college than Broderick Jones. Broderick Jones is raw, is still developing things there. Maybe that plays into it. But like you said, it's the bottom line. The Steelers are going to play their best guys, and Broderick Jones hasn't been one of their best guys. So I think that, like you said, that's kind of just the cut and dry of it.
Yeah, I think sometimes, Chris, fans just pay attention to the hype. I mean, we pay a lot of attention to these guys during the pre-draft process, and people just see, round 1, pick number 14, and they think, just put him in there. He's going to be fine. Yeah. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. I mean, Chris, you can pull up Pro Football Reference, and I guarantee you, just go back 5 years or 3 years, whatever year you want to pick. And half of the first round guys you'll look at and you'll be like, these guys were first round picks. I mean, it's like half the guys who are selected in the first round, I don't want to say they're bust, but they don't turn out the way teams think they are. They don't end up being, first round caliber players. And, a handful become Pro Bowlers, maybe one or two become all pros. And I just think sometimes the expectations are too great for these guys. And you really do just have to judge them for what they are on the field. And right now, as we said, Broderick Jones isn't good enough to be in the starting lineup for the Steelers. I'm not saying he can't get there, Chris. I'm just saying right now he's not there.
When you look at how he's played, what are the things he has to do to get there in your mind? When you just look back at his mistakes, what's been going on?
Yeah. I think anytime you're committing 3 penalties in the short amount of time he was on the field, I think it's
3 penalties, 6 plays. That was that's how short of a span that was.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think number one is probably his mental mental approach to the game. I don't think he was prepared to go in there for whatever reason. Maybe he was disappointed he wasn't a starter anymore. I can't get inside of his head. But the other thing, Chris, is he's just a very raw player right now. And I think sometimes scouting departments will draft guys like Troy Fautanu who are polished, the technique is there, the complete package. And other times you can get a guy drafted in the same portion of the draft like Broderick Jones was, and he's just not a polished guy, but he has the size, he has the length, he has the athleticism to excel, and you have to coach him up. And I'm not putting this on Pat Meyer. I mean, he can't be responsible for everything that happens in terms of the development of these guys, but I think it's clear, he's 18 months into his tenure as a Pittsburgh Steeler, and he's not nearly polished enough to deserve to be out there on the field. So, he's got to get with Pat Meyer, he's got to get with Isaac, and he's got to just straighten out his technique and rebuild his confidence. I do think mental approach, confidence are really a big portion of this equation, maybe even 50% of it, and the other half is just getting out there, drilling your technique, and getting better on the practice field. And like I said, I think he's going to have plenty of time to do that. I don't expect to see Broderick Jones back on the field for the Steelers until there's an injury, number one, or until Dan Moore starts to underperform, and there's no signs of him doing that.
Yeah, I agree there. Quick thoughts here. What you've seen that Troy Fautanu has done well that that has earned the praise that he's gotten from Mike Tomlin.
I mean, his pass pro has been phenomenal throughout training camp. I was trying to think about, him one-on-ones, Chris, up in Latrell. I'm trying to think, when was he beaten up there? I know he was beaten in the preseason game before he got hurt, but I had a hard time going back and thinking, TJ got the better of him, or, someone else got the better of him up there. I mean, he was just winning the vast majority of his reps, and he's really, he's solid in the run game too. I mean, he's just a really good football player. So when Mike Tomlin says he's lighting it up, he was lighting it up in every aspect during training camp. Obviously, the injury kind of slowed his development a little bit because he was laid up for 3 weeks or so. But as you saw, he needed 1 week of ramp up during that Labor Day week, and then 1 week where he wasn't in the starting lineup. And they were like, okay, we've seen enough. You're good to go. And, let's put him back out there.
I think it says a lot that he's earned that kind of confidence that quickly from the Steelers coaching staff. He's when I look at his tape, he looks like he makes the part. He has all the fundamentals down, and if he just gets stronger and continues to grow his chemistry with James Daniels, that right side could be a real problem soon. When I look at Broderick Jones, I see a guy. I wrote about this in the preseason. His problem is his punch. Last year when he engaged defenders, he would get his hands on guys, and once he got his hands on you, you were in a lot of trouble because he had a lot of power. This year he's not getting his hands on guys, and that makes me think. And I know we're talking about reasons being given other than him not playing well, but I have to think that when I saw a really strong punch last year and a non-existent punch this year, and he has an elbow injury, I have to think that those are correlated. And so that makes me think that maybe it could behoove Broderick Jones to sit for a little bit. And if that injury can heal, if he can get to a point where he can trust his arms again, or at least his right arm, that could do a lot for him being able to get back and maybe get that punch back and maybe play a more complete game.
Yeah, and when you get benched like this, honestly, people, players don't really think this way, but maybe they do after the fact. Sometimes sitting is watching is good for them. They don't realize it at the moment of their benching, but as these things go on, I think sometimes the realization comes just from watching on the field, watching what your peers do, and then obviously learning on the practice field too. So maybe that will be the case for Broderick as well.
Maybe we'll see how that continues to play out. We got to talk about the quarterback situation because it looks like things really aren't changing. Our colleague Jerry Dulac, he went out there. He said last week, "Hey, Justin Fields is going to be starting for 2 weeks," and looks like that's going to be the case again. We'll talk about what Ray's insights are on Justin Fields. I did a little bit of film study. We'll talk about that as well here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by SmartSide. Here's a message from our friends at SmartSide.
Between beauty and durability, making your neighbors jealous has never been easier. Introducing LP SmartSide Expert Finish Trim and Siding, now in brushed smooth texture. Available in 16 versatile colors, LP SmartSide Expert Finish products help create timeless designs and beautiful, longer-lasting dream homes. That's the beauty of brushed smooth.
Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about this quarterback situation. Justin Fields looks like he's going to get his third start this season. Mike Tomlin saying that Russell Wilson is not going to be practicing full today as he anticipates, unless there's a crazy turn of events. It looks like it's Justin Fields again against the Chargers. I did a film study where I talked about how Justin Fields is still finding the balance between when to run, when to pass deep. But I looked at when I asked Mike Tomlin about this right now, as far as all quarterbacks who have started 2 games in the NFL, he has thrown 12 passes that have targeted beyond the sticks, so beyond the chains to get a first down. That's the fewest of quarterbacks who have started in the last 2 games. But it's also he's completed 8 of them. And that's the third best completion percentage of quarterbacks who started in those 2 games. And I asked Mike Tomlin about it, and he was basically like, it's not just about how he's being mindful, it's about how we're being mindful. And he talked about how, hey, this is a young offense. We're on the road for the first 2 games. It's September. We're still building the offense. So we're not trying to take a whole lot of shots to put us in situations where it's going to be 3rd and long a lot. We want to be 3rd and short a lot. And we want to be, and he talked about being mindful of that. And Ray, I get that. And when I look at it, a lot of the shots that Justin Fields has taken, they're in isolated spots where it's like, hey, he knows he's got a one-on-one. It's kind of there's a pre-snap look where it's like, hey, this is what you got. Take the shot here. I think it's been very intentional for the Steelers and how careful they've been. And I have to wonder, when do those training wheels come off Justin Fields, or do they ever, because of how this team wants to win with its defense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Mike Tomlin's thinking, why would we take the training wheels off when we're 2-0 and we're plus 5 or 6 in the turnover margin? And, we won both the games on the road. I mean, he's probably sitting back and saying, we can do this for a little while longer. I think the Chargers are a good team, but there's questions about their skill position players, and Ben Herbert and the Chargers running a conservative offense. So I have every reason to believe this will be another conservative approach, low scoring game, really by both coaches here on Sunday afternoon. I don't know, just thinking ahead, Chris. Do you need to take the handcuffs off in Indianapolis? I don't know, maybe if you fall behind, but the Colts didn't really look that strong against the Packers this week. Maybe against Dak. I mean, Dak and Justin Herbert are definitely the 2 best quarterbacks they'll face in the first half of the season. So I honestly think the first time you might see it is when they fall behind. And I'm not saying fall behind by 1 score. I'm saying fall behind by 2 scores, and they have to get back in the game because what they're doing right now is working. And why change it?
No, I think that's the thing right now. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that's where the Steelers offense is right now. But at the same time, it's not broke because they've been able to win, but they do need to score more points. Like 18 points against the Falcons, we talked about that. 13 points against the Broncos, and listen, not all that's on Justin Fields. The holding call, the 2 holding calls on Broderick Jones stalled a drive that otherwise would have been inside the 10. Especially even if you just take away the last holding call they called on Broderick Jones, that throw he threw to George Pickens for 51 yards was perfect on a laser and over Patrick Surtain. That's another part of this. Justin Fields said he was not going to be scared of Pat Surtain. He wasn't. He went after him several times in this game. It only really yielded 1 defensive pass interference call and 2 catches for 29 yards. But if that holding call doesn't bring back that other, that 51-yard pass is huge. You also had a pick play. George Pickens was that wiped out a George Pickens touchdown. I think that there is, despite the box score numbers, I do think there's potential for Justin Fields to put up bigger numbers, even with the style of football the Steelers have played so far. I do think they're opening up more parts of the offense for him.
Yeah, the Steelers haven't played clean games in the first 2, which really makes opening 2-0 on the road all that more impressive because they have shot themselves in the foot quite a bit on offense. And as a sidebar here, Mike Tomlin usually brings in officials on Fridays just to, get the players used to, having the game being called. He's doing it on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. So he is sick of seeing all those yellow flags out there, even though it's a league-wide trend, but obviously he's putting the onus on his players to correct it. He's not going to expect, the league to step in and correct it. So, the penalties have been a big issue. If some buts were candies and nuts, that whole thing, maybe Justin Fields would have better stats, but he doesn't. And, I think within the constraints of this offense, the way the game is being called, the way the game plan is being crafted, he's doing just fine. You don't hear any complaints from Tomlin or the coaches about him. It's been all positive. Same with the players. And like I said, I think that's going to continue on here until they lose a game.
I think so too. I wanted to talk to you real quick about that referee decision because I think there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, duh, why don't you do that all the time? Mike Tomlin did acknowledge that they do that every Friday as part of like their walkthroughs. Like, hey, like this is what you don't do. But I do think it's interesting to say like, hey, like, you know what? It's the normally this is how we go about business, but we are changing it up this week to show like, hey, we need these guys to get it because you're not always going to get through games that you keep shooting yourself in the foot pretty with a win. Again, they've won these last 2 games by a single possession. Granted, the Falcons look like they may be a better team than what people gave them credit for when the Steelers been the way they beat the Eagles in Philadelphia on Monday night. But also, I have to look at, you're about to play the Chargers. The Chargers want to play football the way that the Steelers want to play football, and that's going to be a clash of 2 teams that know each other. And I think that could be a really interesting measuring stick for where this team is.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin mentioned it yesterday. All the former Ravens on the other side, their entire running back stable, it seems like former Ravens. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, their center, Bradley Bozeman. I think he said Hayden Hurst is out there as well. So, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of former Ravens. And, Chris, when you think back about to Steelers Ravens over the last, 5 to 10 years, even when Greg Roman was the OC in Baltimore, and it hasn't changed since he left, they're always close, low-scoring games. So why should we believe that there will be anything different on Sunday when Jim Harbaugh is running the game as opposed to John Harbaugh? He and his brother are very similar. They're similar to the Steelers, and that's why I think it's going to be one of those knockdown, drag-em-out games, and it's going to be a fun one on Sunday at Acrisure.
I think so too. I want to talk about something else that Mike Tomlin said, and that was about the Steelers wide receiver situation, because he's been very short with us when we've asked about that situation. I want to talk about how that's kind of played out and how you see that actually playing out as the season rolls along. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you the show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They are mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them now today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. And we're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can go and check out all of their Honda cars available right now at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or visit their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, Mike Tomlin, when asked about the wide receiver situation in Pittsburgh, said, do you see a problem or, an issue with the lack of production at your receiver position behind George Pickens? And he simply said, no. And then just looked out into the crowd for the next question. And I have to think, it's funny when Mike Tomlin gives us the Tomlinisms and the long answers and the hot dogs and the paint the barn reds. But when he gives you those one-word answers, that's also his way of saying, like, I'm over this. Like, I'm not trying to talk about this right now. But to the point of this question, right now, if you were to look at the Steelers' receiving numbers through 2 games, George Pickens has 8 catches for 114 yards. That sounds about right. Pat Freiermuth, 8 catches for 66 yards. I think you're expecting a little bit more out of him, but we'll see how that develops as the year goes on. Jaylen Warren is your next leading receiver with 4 catches for 32 yards. And then you get to the other receivers. Van Jefferson has 3 catches for 15 yards. Najee Harris, 2 for 14. Calvin Austin, 2 for 13. And that's it. You also, after that, you have Darnell Washington's 9-yard touchdown. So, you have 2 catches for Darnell Washington, 2 for 10 yards. You have Michael Pruitt's 1 catch for 9 yards. I misread the lines there, but still, there is no wide receiver production behind George Pickens. Like that. Let's be real about that. And Mike Tomlin saying that they don't see that as a problem right now. Do you buy that, Ray, or do you think that they're just this is them kind of just like saying we don't need wide receivers. Meanwhile, it's like, Omar, call some people. We might need some wide receivers.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely concerned about it. He's just not going to come out and admit it. And all the proof you need is them running out 12, 13, and 14 personnel at the rate that they do. I mean, how many teams I haven't looked at the analytics yet this year, but I would bet, Chris, that they lead the league in 3 tight end formations. I think they would probably be up there in 2 tight end formations the way they have played this year. So they're using their tight ends as much as they are. Yeah, they like them and, they're good players, but they're doing it because their receivers aren't very good after George Pickens. And that's the bottom line. So Mike Tomlin can say whatever he wants to say, but, Steeler fans are smart. They can look out there and see that the production isn't nearly good enough. Those guys aren't getting open. And that, that's the way it is right now. And it's really not going to change unless they address it by the trade deadline. And there's some time for Omar to get something done there, but there was 6 months for Omar to get something done up until the Brandon Ayuk thing, and he didn't get it done. So I'm not entirely 100% certain that, he will get something done before the trade deadline. So we'll just have to see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks.
I also have to wonder, like, if the Steelers suffer any injuries at the position, with that, that has to change the equation. Like the Steelers are also in a position where if George Pickens goes down, what the heck do they do? Because he is their one real weapon in the receiving game. I also think they need to just involve Pat Freiermuth more. Like, get that guy the ball. You can see he can make plays. But I don't think that they're not drawing up plays for him. I think that they are. I don't think that they're not drawing up plays for him. I think that they are actually. they've been very mindful about getting him some opportunities. Like, for example, I did a Justin Fields film study yesterday. So go check that out at post-Gazette.com and looking at his ability to make decisions. There were times where, and there was one play in particular with third down where Justin Fields kind of locked in on George Pickens, and it was a unique kind of coverage the Broncos threw at him. They ran man on one side of the field and zone on the other, and the man coverage on George Pickens was with outside leverage, which took away his outside breaking route, kind of knowing that's the way he wanted to go. And Justin Fields kind of stuck with him. But if he just looks to his right just a little bit, Pat Freiermuth, because the other side of the field was zone, broke to the middle part of the field, was wide open for a first down. I think they got to get him more opportunities. Like they got to use these tight ends. If you're not going to use these wide receivers, you got to use these tight ends when you can, and maybe be more deliberate with your game plan and say, hey, Justin, remember, these guys need to be part of the equation.
Yeah, and I think you need more volume for Pat Freiermuth, but you also need more yards per catch. I mean, he's still down around 8 or 9 yards per catch, so you definitely want to see that in double digits. The one positive I will say was, Arthur Smith having the confidence to have Darnell Washington in that situation. We asked Darnell after the game if he was the first read. He didn't answer us, but it seemed like he ran a really good pattern, and Justin Fields was looking at him the whole way. So, a lot of people, just feel like he's a blocking tight end. And in essence, I think that's what he is. He's not ever going to be a prolific receiver, but, for him to step up there and, score their first touchdown of the season was good. One thing to keep an eye on this week, Michael Pruitt is injured. He's got a knee injury. How do they distribute those snaps if Michael Pruitt can't go this week? Not much production from Michael Pruitt, but he plays a lot. I mean, his snap count is up there probably around Freiermuth. So, do they elevate Rodney Williams and just take him into that role? Do they utilize Connor Hayward more? Maybe that forces you to use your receivers more. I don't know, Chris, but people might not think that's a big injury entering this game, but the way they have used Michael Pruitt so far suggests it does.
I think so too. I think that they use him and Connor Hayward as kind of, nondescript H-backs as well as tight ends, and that changes things. And I do think the Steelers are going to need to be mindful of how they deploy their personnel. Also because, right now, I think the Steelers wide receivers haven't been really good blockers so far. They especially that Falcons game, there were plays where Van Jefferson was getting blown up and on the run. We saw the play where Van Jefferson caught the ball. Both Pickens and Calvin Austin just didn't block the two guys in front of him when they had a 2-on-3 situation. And I think that was I think that the Steelers, that could be a really big deal. And it makes me go back to Mike Tomlin's thing about he's just not addressing it. I truly do think the Steelers are kind of trying to pretend like all is well and all is fine, so that when they go to the trade tables and they try to see what receivers are out there in the markets, they're not, that they're not lacking. It's not like the other team can't be like, you really need that. I know you really want that, so I'm not going to give this away for cheap. And they might drive up the price on him. And Ray, I think it's interesting. A lot of Steelers fans are pointing this out. Reports are coming from Carolina that they're already looking to put Deontay Johnson on the trade market. And again, rumors, not substantial anything. And Steelers fans are like, well, go back and get him. And I'm just like, guys. They just traded this guy away for not huge compensation. It's not like they got Dante Jackson, who's been pretty solid, but it wasn't like they got back a world for him. I have a hard time thinking they're just going to trade back for him. I may be wrong there, but I have a hard time seeing them bringing that guy right back into the locker room, and he's just going to be like, oh, that's great. I love it here.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to look at it from a big perspective. They didn't trade Deontay Johnson because he wasn't productive. They traded him because he was an issue inside that locker room and some of his behavior on the field. So I would be surprised if they went down that road again, Chris, but I don't know. You're in dire straits with your receiver production. Sometimes you have to kind of roll the dice too. The one thing we should mention before we go, Roman Wilson is going to practice more again this week. I don't feel like he's ready. He missed a ton of practice time, but Chris, at what point do you just say, hey, this guy can't be any worse than what we're putting out there. Let's see what we have. Maybe it's time to to give Roman Wilson a shot, even if the practice time has been limited.
To your point, I do think that Roman Wilson couldn't hurt at this point. I think Van Jefferson has gotten open on some routes and just not gotten some great opportunities. But the Steelers need playmakers, bottom line, on this offense. And again, they are very much bottling things up. They are very much trying to not lose the game. They're trying to let the defense win the game. But at some point, they're going to need points. And who knows? They might need points this week because whereas the Steelers right now, they have the number 2 scoring defense in the NFL, the Chargers have the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL. So, again, these are two teams that want to run the football. And Justin Herbert is a much more established quarterback right now than Justin Fields is. And I think that's where the Steelers defense can be a better unit than the Chargers, but that's going to be a battle. And on one side of that battle is going to be the Steelers offense looking to find answers and get over 20 points for the first time this season. So I think that's still going to be a question that we examine all week long, and why I don't buy, and really all year long until the trade deadline. It's why I don't buy that Mike Tomlin really is just okay with how everything's going at wide receiver.
Yeah, don't believe his words, believe his actions. And they're not, number one, they're not playing the receivers a lot, and even when they're in there, they're not targeting them a lot. It's almost as if Scotty Miller doesn't even exist. I mean, the guy's on the 53-man roster, Chris, and I barely ever see him out there on the field. So it's obvious they don't have confidence in these guys. So, like I said, don't believe him. Believe what he puts out there on the field.
Absolutely. He's Ray Fittipaldo. I'm Chris Carter. Thank you for checking out the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Post-Gazette. We'll have a practice report this Thursday, getting you a look at how things have looked at the Steelers facility this week. And then we will have our Friday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast, getting you ready for the Steelers' first home game of the season against the Los Angeles Chargers. Keep it here at the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.